currently recording.
We're rolling.
Oh, Colin, you should do the welcome back to the Seattle Sucks podcast.
I thought we were just gonna wait in silence for him to do it and then rag on him for forgetting.
I was actually hoping I had got out of that somehow. Welcome back to Seattle Sucks, a podcast about hating the city we love.
Colin, you remember?
I did. I remember it.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. We're back with a guest, a recurring guest here. Colin, how are you doing?
Yeah, yes. Our good friend Colin.
Yeah, guests from the beginning, they just liked me so much. I stayed on until I had a baby. But yeah, I'm okay. How are you two doing?
We're doing good. We should say though, a little later in the episode, we have another cool guest, an interview with Alycia Ramirez, who's got a new column in the South Seattle Emerald this week, titled "Spog Head and the SPD are waging an old propaganda war against protesters and the left to thwart accountability." That is later in the episode. It's very good. That's going to be later though, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, before any of our listeners can get anything good, they have to first listen to us.
Yeah, we have to, yes.
They have to eat their vegetables.
You must sit through us just shooting the shit aimlessly for a bit here.
Yeah, speaking of vegetables, it's wildfire season, guys. How's that smoke over on the boat, Greg? How's the barbecue going?
Okay. So you may or may not know if you're not familiar with boating, but for various reasons, they're not really designed to seal up. Also, I did buy, because I have a box fan, because of the project I was doing. I was using it for ventilation and then using it just to keep the boat cool during the hot summer, in one of the hatches. But I cleaned up all the fiberglass dust out of it, and I got I got some like 20 by 20 big, good filters to like purify the air in the boat. But it's like I say, it doesn't seal up. I come and go from it quite a bit. And it's the like square footage of the thing is not, a lot. So I haven't taken the filters out of the box because they were expensive, and I'm just such a cheap ass that I've been like, nah, fuck it. It's going to go away. I'm going to return these filters. I've just been wearing a mask in the boat.
Very normal. Sounds like a very comfortable way to live. Yeah.
I mean, like I say, I could. I realized I do have a little built-in fan on a heater that's built under the settee that I could. I ordered a small filter that'll fit that I can start filtering. But the big 20 by 20 like hefty ones, like I'm gonna use it for a few days, then I'm gonna store it forever, or like throw it away, store it for next smoke season. I mean,
don't worry, there will be fires later.
Yeah, I believe this will be an annual tradition. So
I can't store things I use annually, monthly at the least,
Yeah, well, how are things over where you're at, Colin, where you're normal and have like walls and a door and stuff? Did the smoke get to Magnolia, or was the bridge too crowded that it couldn't pass?
Well, first of all, Brian, thank you for saying that I'm normal. That's a wonderful compliment these days. It's been pretty bad, honestly. Luckily we have one purifier that we got last fire season, so I guess that was 2 years ago. And we've just been moving it all around our house, and my infant daughter has developed a cough and seems to not be able to eat very well because the air is so chewy.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So that's awesome, and we're indoors, of course. All our windows are closed. Just the normal stuff of waking up in the middle of the night with a burning throat and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
as one does. But I really enjoyed that sort of yellow cake pall that we had.
Yeah.
I felt like I was in Stalker. It
Mhm.
Yeah.
rocked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey,
Awesome.
no filters on your Instagram pictures this week. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was really wonderful. Yeah, I went for an especially apocalyptic picture, which I wasn't even thinking about it when I did. I just wanted to get somewhere up high so you could get like a little distance to so you could see like how, to where the smoke ended all visibility. So I went to the Northgate Mall and I went to the parking garage, which was completely empty except for three guys running a like airsats car washing operation like three floors up.
Hell yeah.
Very strange. And I went to the very
Get
top of
that
the
paper.
exactly. And I went to the very top of the parking garage and I took this photo of this bleak, empty parking garage that looks like it's falling apart, of this bleak, empty mall that is falling apart. And then yeah, with the nice like orange glow and everything like that. I was like, what a wonderful picture. But yeah, what a time to be alive.
Man, yeah, it's fucking I don't I don't even know. I mean, what do you say when you just look out and the world like is unbreathable, you know?
Well, what I say is I look at my new wife and I say, get your gun. The Antifa super soldiers are at it again. Let's form a roadblock. Which is apparently what a lot of people in Oregon were saying this week.
Oh, cool.
And I mean, just unbelievable, just weird white vigilantes in the country setting up roadblocks to apparently demanding to inspect every car that went by, like to go through their car and shit to make sure they weren't part of the Antifa legions that had caused the wildfires. Yeah.
Did you see those signs, Brian? Those hand painted signs that said like "You loot, we shoot," and
No.
looters and arsonists will be shot. There's a few news stories about that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, Brain got into it with her cousin on Facebook who lives in Eastern Washington about this, and it was just so funny because they're like, "No, we have proof. Here's this YouTube video where you can't really even see like what's happening or anything like that." And Brain kept going like, "Okay, well then who started the like other 90 wildfires that are going currently on the West Coast right now?" Or the ones last year, or the one that's burning through the Arctic right now. like does Antifa have Arctic bases now? like, what about the ones in Australia, right? I mean, it's
It's the
but
Fortress of Solidarity, Brian.
yeah. Well, it is one of these things of I think we are getting to the point of the problems are so big and also so obvious that all you can do is retreat into fantasy, right? And
Yeah,
form
well,
your Antifa roadblock.
it should foreclose in everyone's mind once and for all the impossibility of reasoning with
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
people, the committed like
Mhm.
right wing chuds of this country on any issue, because I feel like obviously there's a lot of talk about climate change because of this, and a lot of like Dem politicians are out there, uh, like Joe Biden included, even talking about climate change. And this has been like the story of the last 20 years of like talking about like showing like, look, can't you see, to these people, like, can't you see this is affecting your life, like,
Mhm.
doesn't isn't it obvious, the global warming, blah blah blah. And like, the thing is, it's not these aren't really convincing evidence of anything. If you understand what's going on and you believe like the like conclusive evidence that does exist about the like skyrocketing levels of CO2 in the air, and the like effect that's going to have, then it's easy to see this uh as part of that system. But it's not evidence for global warming. It's not going to convince someone who's like out to
Mhm.
lunch on this shit. It's not going to convince Donald Trump. It's not going to convince his followers.
Well, I think too that the problem is so big and the solution to it is so anathema to their personal comfort and
Yeah.
things like that, and to the status quo, that even if it is obvious to them, the sort of dissonance that it creates in their mind is going to force this retreat into fantasy. You know,
Well,
it's the when prophecies fail thing, right?
but it's like any other thing. I don't think it has to get there, because I don't think anyone who is like a hardcore chud is going to be confronted with this reality that they have to like have like a when prophecies fail moment, a millenarian sort of crisis. Like
Mhm.
I I think they're living in their own world. They don't believe this shit. They believe it's all hokum. There are plenty of there's been decades of, people explaining how none of this stuff matters,
Mhm.
paid for by the oil industry. And then there's a whole sort of cultural right wing affect that is dedicated to being against this shit. So like that doesn't matter. What this could mean potentially, the level of devastation that this is causing, which is like, my God, there's like 500,000 people displaced in Oregon alone,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, it's unbelievable. What it could mean is galvanizing people who aren't insane, like probably 2/3 of this country. Certainly, galvanizing a left to feel like it needs to get together and just take drastic action to stop this. And who knows? Maybe if anyone could be convinced, it would be center uh your average American liberal, but I don't think even that's going to trickle up to meaningful policy on their part, right? Like you've
Yeah.
got like everyone from Joe Biden to Gavin Newsom out talking like, gosh, yeah, oof, climate change, just because it's in the fucking air, literally. But I mean, they're full of shit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So if anything good comes of this, it could be yet another sort of crack in the legitimacy of these fucking charlatans, like who, Joe Biden against Green New Deal, for fucking, doesn't even want to outlaw fracking. Gavin Newsom, approved, massive expansion of drilling. Eh,
Mhm.
you could see this stuff becoming so real, people realizing that it's your average American, like big city lib. You could. I'm not saying this will happen. I'm saying a best case would be those people go, okay. I mean, if you're not gonna in the future like have take the right stance on this, then you're not gonna have credibility on this.
Yeah.
Well,
Maybe. I mean, that's the best you can hope for. What do you think, Colin?
well, there is something that I wanted to say on Gavin Newsom because um, I'm sure that you saw that video of him doing that
With
talk,
Trump?
like before the smoldering ruins of
Oh yeah.
whatever that
Yeah.
once was. It was really odd because he was sort of smiling,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
He has
and
this weird smile on his face.
yeah,
It's
and,
creepy as fuck.
completely. And to your point, Greg, I think that basically like all politics now on either pole, it's the Breitbart or the Andrew Breitbart doctrine of politics being downstream from culture, and
Yeah.
so it just
It's for
becomes a
liberals
culture.
and conservatives. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the cultural issue for him. So he's smiling because he's saying, "Look at this, look at this. Climate change is real. We told you it's real. Fuck your fake news, right?" And that's
Right.
all he has to say. Like
Right.
that
So what he's getting off, the smile on his face is he's going, aha, I'm
exactly
getting one over on you.
right.
Mhm.
But what, as sinister as that is on its own, the joke is on him because he is not. He is not getting it
Yeah.
over on anybody.
Right,
No
we're all
one who
dying.
doesn't think
Yeah.
climate change is real, no one who doesn't think climate change is real, no one, not a
Right,
single person in the world, it will be convinced by these fires,
right.
because the truth, they are not good evidence of anything
Yeah.
taken as their own, unless you're actually looking into the deeper like
Mhm.
science of this and the conclusions of a global scientific community. But what that is for like that's not
Yeah.
an option in
And
this conversation. So
and we can see this same exact thing play out with COVID and it just becoming this issue
yep.
of science. It's science, and that's
Mhm.
it. That's all we're gonna say is
And
that
rather
it's
than doing
science.
anything, really, the
Right.
Democratic governors are basically content to be to the left of Trump on this thing, to the
Yeah.
science side of Trump, to signal, to hand wave, to virtue signal on COVID, and like
Right.
do a few bare minimum things that are like, gosh, we actually believe this is real, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
What's
because
it? Yeah,
the
go ahead, Colin.
extent of the like liberal political imagination is wearing an "I'm was stupid" T-shirt, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, for libs like Newsom or whatever in Inslee, every million acres of fucking forest that burns down is just a point for them against Trump, right?
Yeah.
Whereas for the Trumpites, something more sinister comes, right? And that we began the summer with a whole family being tormented in Forks, Washington, by these freak chuds setting up roadblocks, firing guns around them, threatening them, all this shit, trying to run them off the road. And we all kind of wrote it off because we're like, it's Forks, it's beset by like werewolves and fucking vampires and shit. Like, who knows, right? It's a weird place, right? And then these sort of like white fucking homeowners threw up another giant roadblock just outside of Seattle in Snohomish County, right, when people tried to march to our police chief Carmen Best's house. And Carmen Best openly praised them and talked about how what a great idea it was that they throw this fucking armed vigilante roadblock. And some of us on the show, right, like our show, some of us were like, this doesn't bode well for the future. And now apparently they've been set up in towns, various towns all over Oregon. And I think
Well,
this
just
is
before this, Ted Wheeler in Portland, the fucking
Yeah.
mayor there, said literally called upon Portlanders to rise up, quote unquote, and take their city back.
Yeah.
And so now, you have a crisis happening,
Mhm.
and the stage is set. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter that it's fire.
Yeah.
Any crisis is going to be, there's going to be more and more people ready
Yeah.
to be to live out Chris Kyle's fucking Katrina fantasies.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
I mean, that was the thing, is that they did exactly, I mean, you're exactly right. They did exactly this in Katrina. I mean,
Yeah.
police lined black men up on the Danziger Bridge and shot them in the back of the head. And it's on tape and nobody did anything about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, there is all sorts of people who showed up dead in Katrina who were shot and nobody did anything about it. I think this kind of vigilantism is here to stay and it's only going to grow from here. And it's, in 10 years, if you want to deliver a Domino's pizza anywhere outside of like an urban core, you're going to have to fucking mount a 50 cal into the bed of your truck like you're driving through a fucking war zone to make sure that you can get that thing there on time.
Well, it'll be
But,
a matrix of vigilantism and
Yeah.
What's a pithy word for cops being just out of control?
Yeah.
I mean,
that, and I mean, I think a lot of these people too are watching the police having so much fun, and they want to have fun now too.
100%, yeah.
Yeah. So,
but this is all under, this is all happen. This is all true, and we can talk about this, like the political ramifications of all this. But climate change is real. We do actually know about this,
Mhm.
and we know now that. I mean, I'm reading this. This is written up all over the place, but I was reading I've got an LA Times story open here about the World Meteorological Organization from the UN published a new study update talking about their update to the timetables for global warming, basically. And the takeaway is that they're now saying decent chance in the next 4 years the globe could hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level average. That is one of the sort of markers of the Paris Agreement. And they're saying now, whoosh, this is all happening way faster than we have said in our previous reports. And now that's looking like, that could come between now and say, 2025. Whereas just 2 years ago, the big report 2 years ago said we need to watch. If we don't change anything right now, we could hit that 1.5 degree number by, say, 2030 to 2052.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the same group was saying 2 fucking years ago. They were saying 1.5 degrees if we do nothing.
Yeah. Sometime
in the next decades, and now it's maybe by 2025. And this number is, it's arbitrary, but it's like a number that was set down, saying that, like, yes, it's not like the 2 degree number where, like, it will be irreversible and out of control forever and there's nothing you can do. It's the 1.5 degree number is like, if this line is crossed, yeah, you could still maybe reverse it if you don't let it get to 2, but you will have caused an enormous amount. By that time, like, shit will get out of control to the point where you're going to cause a lot of havoc. And we're already, as of the sort of the high points this year, at looking at 1.1 degrees. We've already hit 1.1 degrees over, as a global average, over pre-industrial levels. So, hey, all awesome news to add to everything else.
Yeah, and I urge people to go back. There was a book written in, I think, 2011 or 12 by author Christian Perenni called Tropic of Chaos. And basically, he's a journalist, and he makes the argument that the convergence of neoliberalism, counterinsurgency policies, the flooding of the world with small arms and other weapons, and climate change essentially is building us towards a bloodbath. And so far, he's looking pretty fucking right now about all this. So just going to throw that little plug out there. And now that we've talked about the horrible state response to this and the vigilante response, maybe we should kick to our interview with Alycia Ramirez.
Hey, everybody. We are here with a very special guest. Alycia Ramirez works on immigrant rights, doing anti-ICE work, and work in anti-racism and demilitarization and defunding of police, as well as rapid response trainings on how to safely respond to immigration enforcement activity in communities through the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, and now has a new column in the South Seattle Emerald titled "Spoghead and the SPD are waging an old propaganda war against protesters and the left to thwart accountability," in which she puts Mr. Mike Solon on blast, writing, "Since Black Lives Matter protests kicked off in Seattle at the end of May, police have decided that the way to respond to protests against police brutality is with police brutality. This tactically only strengthens protesters' demands for defunding and accountability, something the Seattle Police Department is aware of. Weeks of footage showing officers beating up protesters and targeting medics and media has resulted in SPD losing the narrative. To regain it, they are choosing the Trump tactic, which is to deflect and blame and demonize their detractors. Seattle Police Officers Guild President Mike Solon has taken these propaganda efforts even further by using dog whistles and shock politics to bolster support among SPOG law and order supporters and fearful white suburbanites who see the protests as violent anarchy. Solon recently posted such a message on Twitter, claiming that Antifa was trying to murder officers, and he implied in an interview with conservative talk show host Dory Monson that he would shoot protesters who breached his property if he felt threatened. Alycia, thank you so much for coming on. People have been asking us to have you on for a while, and you've got a lot to say about cops, so thank you for coming, and for...
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
thanks
we're stoked. And yeah, we really enjoyed the new column in the Emerald. Actually, a lot of great stuff coming out of the Emerald these days. If you haven't checked it out, we'll of course link to that piece.
Yeah, in the show notes.
Yeah,
If we had maybe just start with Mark Sullen. I mean, this guy is a real character. Maybe, or Mike Sullen, sorry, not Mark Sullen. Mike Sullen, a real character. Can you maybe like tell us a little bit about Mike Sullen and maybe a little bit about his campaign ad?
Right. So I actually became aware of Mike Solon last year. He actually did a. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the group Safe Seattle. They're an
Oh,
anti-homeless group.
we're familiar.
Yeah. Yes. I figured. So he actually
Longtime members.
yeah, that's how I became familiar with Mike Solon. He spoke at their panel about homelessness last spring,
Mm-hmm.
and had some not great things to say, of course.
And that was when he
And then
was
not,
the like
yeah,
vice president
vice
of
president.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And not a whole lot longer after that, he ran his campaign for the SPOG president, and went back to State Seattle and started campaigning there. He sat down and did a really long interview with them. They promoted his piece, where I actually talked about it in the Emerald article, where it's just basically Fox News propaganda. He's like beating protesters and saying, we're going to take back the narrative. So he really ran on that hard line, like super right wing Fox Breitbart kind of vibe. And it won. He won 70% of the membership's vote, which is a lot of police officers.
That's a fucking mandate
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is.
to do what he promised to do in his campaign commercial, which was just like it, like footage of cops beating up protesters and saying like, yeah, more of this, please.
Yeah, I mean that was what was interesting about his campaign ad is that no, you would expect from the police union, right? Pictures of protesters in the street or whatever, and running, a Nixonian sort of law and order campaign. But the fact that he basically was like, no, I'll have the pictures of the protesters, but I want to show like what we do, which is just the cops beating the hell out of them and be like, yeah, that's what I want to do. I thought
And
that
that's
was,
what they've done.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Pretty
true,
much.
true to his
Yeah.
word, true to his word,
Yeah,
right?
it's actually kind of scary, because if you were to just view the video, the end part of Mike Solon's campaign video without any context of what the video was about or for, and then you view any footage over the last 3 months of Seattle police being protesters, you really can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
And that's what's really scary, and what had activists and folks like me really concerned when we saw Mike Solon kind of ascend, the throne of Seattle police, is, this wasn't just him trying to use some nice shock graphics to win. I mean, this was a warning of what he planned to do with the police force. And what we saw in that video has played out in real time in some really awful ways.
Well, you quote this in the piece also, I believe, and one thing that I remember from his campaign, I think from that video, is like promising to promote an SPD narrative of things like this very like actively. And so like it's not just on the one hand it's like this very like anti-dissent right-wing law and order thing, but also like he came in, part of his pitch was a PR angle of saying like we're going to do PR to push our narrative from within SPD as the union, and he's doing that all over like conservative media, right?
Yeah, he's been on Fox News dozens of times. He's been on like a bunch of other like right wing type of like podcasts and shows. Law Enforcement Today, which is a really popular like shock jock right wing site that law enforcement officers like to follow. He's been on there multiple times, so he's really taking that narrative and spread it nationally. And what really concerns me and worries me is that eventually he's going to have the direct ear of Trump himself, and we see what happens when that happens. Like in Portland, the people were being disappeared off the street. Um, those are all things that have really real, tangible, scary consequences.
Yeah, that's a really terrifying thought. Mike Solon like climbing the uh like right wing neo-fascist ladder close enough to, like, you know, get a phone call from the White House and shoot the shit with Trump about like what to do about Seattle Antifa. That's chilling.
Yeah, and I want to maybe quote this. You quote Solon in your piece here. You know, he has this thing where he says, "When you bend to the mob, this is talking about defunding SPD. When you bend to the mob, we lose as a society, we lose as a nation. Seattle and Portland are the epicenter of far left progressive socialism and neo Marxist ideology. If only, right? This is all about November's election, and police are
Yeah.
caught in the middle, right?" And I mean, it's almost indistinguishable from Trump in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, no, it is. And I think there's one thing that Mike Solon actually in that part did unintentionally tell the truth on, and it is about the election. SPOG and the SPD is very aware that people are really hypersensitive about the election. They're aware that these deep divides are here, and they're aware that this election, in a lot of ways, is going to decide not just our fate, but their fate. Um, Trump is a pretty he's a pretty good ally for them to have in office right now. I mean, he's not going to hold any of them accountable, and they know that. So I kind of almost think that they're a little afraid that if he loses, there goes they're taking back the narrative, right? So I really think that they've done something kind of terrifying, is where they've tapped into that. And if you notice, like if you look on their like Twitter and all the people that follow them, cheering them on when they're beating protesters, like these are the people that are like the Trump supporters. It's not a coincidence that they're doing all this in the midst of an election. Um, you know, they're very much like Trump. They're playing their base, and there are people that are getting enjoyment out of that, and that is who Spog and Mike Solon and SPD are really targeting. They're not targeting the majority, because the majority is really disgusted by this. They're targeting that minority in a really heated election year.
Yeah, I mean, this is like Nazi get out the vote, I guess.
Yeah, which is ironic, because the article that also came out in the Emerald about Mike Solon being illegally registered to vote at
Hilarious.
precincts,
Yeah.
as I say and not as I do, right? Um, and it's really terrifying to watch. And to me, what's more terrifying than that is that there seems to be no one right now that can hold them accountable, that can really stop them. The mayor is not going to do anything. The city council kind of, it seems like they want to do something, kind of, but their hands are really tied as far as what they can do. And they know, like, the Justice Department is not going to do anything at all at this point, not under this administration. So they're really emboldened, and it's been terrifying. I actually watched the footage from Labor Day when people protested at SPOG headquarters, and they
Mm-hmm.
decided to blare country music while riding out and beating protesters. Uh, that was really terrifying for me to watch. And what was disgusting about it was that they then, on their official communications, talked about that event like, "Ha, we trolled the libs." I mean,
Yeah.
clearly it's like they're pandering to to that base, to those people. And if he's on Fox News enough, eventually he'll get the president's ear.
Yeah, I mean, sure. And we know that from his, giving audience like David Clark and stuff like that, that Trump is perfectly willing to entertain these like insane sort of fringe police, not fringe in the world of policing, but fringe in like, the world of society elements.
Humanity.
Yeah, humanity elements. I
The
mean,
human
the,
fringe.
yeah, the protest that was at Spog, where they came in, the police literally timed their attack at the protest to Big and Rich's "Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy,"
Oh,
a
that's
song
great country music.
yeah, I completely forgotten about this song existed, since I've been in Texas in so long. But I mean, to me, it had like the unmistakable sort of feel to it of a giant victory celebration, I thought, because the city council had tried to defund them, the mayor vetoed it, and then the council completely collapsed after the veto, and it felt like SPD was like, we won. We
Well, they
got it.
saw they
We're in
saw
charge.
the council basically, put their head between their legs and apologize for disrespecting the beloved public servant Carmen Best. And that's got to feel like a victory for Solon and SPD, right?
The Carmen Bass situation, I have to say, was so frustrating. And part of the reason why it's so frustrating to me, especially as another black woman, is to see people who, on any given day, don't really care about, black people or black causes or black women rising the ranks or any of that thing or any of those things. But when she put in her resignation, all of a sudden it's, look what the city council did. They got rid of this black woman, and see, they don't really support Black Lives Matter. And to me, that's really frustrating, because I mean, just the experiences that I've seen with how Carmen Best has um, controlled her officers, or the things that she has allowed them to do. Um, I'm not surprised that she resigned, and I also, I guess I'm in the minority. I'm kind of a little relieved she resigned. Um, but it's really frustrating to see, if when I talk about, these things as a black woman, I'm told, oh, you're race baiting, you're a snowflake, yada yada yada, whatever. Um, but then here's Carmen Best, who is, she's telling her officers to beat protesters. She's having her neighbors in Snohomish meet the protesters going to her house with rifles, all of those things. And it's just, to me, it's just really maddening and frustrating, because it takes the conversation off of what SPD is doing is really wrong and horrible. They need to be defunded. To city council just kicked off a black woman, and it's just so frustrating. And there's not a
Mhm.
whole lot of black people in Seattle as it is, so it's not like there's a lot of us that can refute that point. So then it just
Mhm.
kind of becomes the overriding theme. And someone, of course, can then dig into this and be like, see, we support black women, we support black people, our chief of police is black and you got rid of her. And it's just gives someone a leg to stand on that he really doesn't deserve.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, as you're saying, I mean, deeply cynical to hear Jason Rance all of a sudden start to care about pay differentials for black women, right? Or even the Seattle Times, who dismissed out of hand that raising the minimum wage might like disproportionately help, black people, black or women, things like that. All of a sudden start to care about it once it affected the beloved police. Of course, all of it being a just smoke show for their just wanting, the police to get rid of what they see as the problem, right? Which is people in the streets.
Yeah, and I really appreciate, like, Nikita Oliver and some other folks in the community have put out some really good counters to that I appreciate, and that is basically calling people back to the fact that the system was going to continue whether or not a black woman was in charge of it or not. And that's really what we need to focus on, is changing that system, because until we change that system, it doesn't matter who we put in there. We could put, we could put a person who's an immigrant, we could put a person who's of indigenous descent. It doesn't matter. The outcome is going to be the same, because the system needs to be changed.
Yeah.
And I'm really thankful to those folks in the community who have been trying to call attention to that and bring it back to that point. But still, it's so frustrating to see that people who on any other given day of the week wouldn't really care.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
maybe almost for the same reason, part of changing that system is going to be getting rid of leadership that has failed, and that includes Carmen Best. So I mean, the council could have taken that opportunity to celebrate her departure, I think, and say, yeah, this is the person who ordered the gassing of us, the council, on the street, in charge of a department that's beating people, and has a terrible record on violence and murder. But yeah, they chose to let the right instrumentalize it, cynically, and that was really frustrating to see. Um, uh, so what I've also seen is so yeah, well, what I was gonna say is yeah, the May Day, or excuse me, the Labor Day action where SPD came in was like particularly brutal and like wild even for them. And it's got me, it's all of this has me thinking about this moment we're in. Like, part of me wants to look around after, again, like, the council's back down. SPD is out basically celebrating by wilding out against people, and I think to myself, like, does this mean they've won? Have they won in the streets? Have they won in the halls of power? And that's really disheartening thought. But I also then, at the same time, have this I'm just looking at this poll from Portland. Now, it's another city, but it's close by, and it's been going through a lot of the same things. I haven't seen any good polling on Seattle, and this was from this week. Is in the Oregonian had this poll they reported on that showed in Portland, 76% of people support Black Lives Matter. That's kind of nebulous, could mean anything. Similarly nebulous, 92% say they support nonviolent protest. Again, that's a thing a lot of people you would expect to sort of in a poll say they support. The real kicker was this: 67% of people, when asked, do you support these protests, meaning what's going on now, whatever you think of it or whatever you think is going on, and this is a city, Portland, that has seen, this was at the end of August when they, had just about 100 days of continuous protest. 67% approved of those protests going on in Portland. Now, that doesn't mean the numbers are exactly the same here, but it's hopeful that, like, outside of the people you described, the sort of fearful white suburbanites, like, actually maybe Spog and the cops aren't necessarily winning the narrative with the average citizens of Seattle.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why Swag is so desperate to take back the narrative, in Solon's words, is that they know that they're losing the war of public trust. I mean, a lot of people that I talk to, including, old white ladies in the suburbs, are appalled by the things that the Seattle police have been doing over the last few months. Um, all you've seen on social media is just cops beating the crap out of people for months on end,
Yeah.
and oftentimes without provocation. And at the same time, people are seeing, we have George Floyd, we have Breonna Taylor, we have so many other people who are dying at the hands of police in ways that didn't need to happen. Um, I think overall that the police in general, not just Seattle police, are really losing the narrative and losing the public trust, and they know that. And they also know that they have an administration though that's not going to take them to task. And
Mm-hmm.
when you can't convince people, um, you can't talk them into something. What is the next thing you can do? Well, you can use force, which is what the police are doing right now. Historically, Seattle police have a really terrible track record. In the 70s, they were so corrupt that a lot of officers actually got indicted because they were running with the mob and doing all of those kinds of shady things. We had the freedom patrols in the mid 1960s that happened because Seattle police officers were basically beating the crap out of black men for them just being black. Something that is a very 2020 thing, unfortunately, that's still happening. Um, it's really a long history that Seattle police has of using force, being dishonest, being distrustful, and I think that it's really eroded the public's trust over time. And now with all these other things coming into focus, people are finally beginning to see how broken our system is, and I think the Seattle police are freaking out a little bit. Um, because what did they say? What, you deflect things onto your enemies that you yourself are doing. a lot of the things Seattle police have accused protesters of doing, they have done. Throw explosive devices, attack people, things like that. So, I mean, in that sense, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that people seem to be really motivated and willing finally. I mean, I'm seeing old 85-year-old women who have never tested before in their life say that they're going to put on some body gear and go out there and get maced. And to me, I mean, it's terrible, but it's also a hopeful sign. And it's a hopeful sign that people are finally realizing that the system is broken and they're finally ready to acknowledge that and fix it, regardless of what that's going to take.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I don't think, going back to 2000, I don't think I've ever seen this level of support, like just in the general public for, things the left are doing in the streets or any sort of left program at all. And it's astonishing, but it's put together with this just brute force that seems to have no formal opposition in our political system from the police itself. And I think, in your article, you talk about this idea of them, you know, trying to reclaim the narrative by sort of putting on others what they're doing to, what they want to do to them and what they are doing to them. And I just wanted to talk about going back to this Labor Day sort of police riot. They on Twitter posted a picture of a Corona box
Yeah,
full of just absolutely pristine, what they labeled as Molotov cocktails that then, pardon the wordplay or whatever, blew up in their face like almost immediately, at least on Twitter and stuff. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about this very bizarre campaign the SPD and a lot of other departments around the country have been running on Twitter, of posting, weapons or whatever from protests.
yeah, and I think Portland police at one time, I think it was a month or two ago, did the same thing
Hmm.
with homemade shields people had made, and literally it was pool noodles and like cardboard boxes and Tupperware lids that were fitted for as gear, and their message was, oh, look at all these violent, dangerous weapons we confiscated, that include pool noodles and Tupperware
Hmm.
lids. And it's so ridiculous. It's that you see this not just from Portland police, Seattle police. The Trump administration does it all the time, um, and it kind of almost seems like desperation. Like they know the public is not, buying what they're selling, and it's just they're just going to put out this narrative regardless of, who believes it or not. Um, they know that they'll always have someone to believe them, like the Law and Order, Blue Lives Matter type. I Sometimes I think that they put out these like obviously false narratives because they know that there's people that's going to believe it. Like for instance, this happened about a week before the Labor Day protest, but there is a protest at the East Precinct and someone threw a Molotov cocktail inside, and the narrative that S2T went with was protesters and Antifa are trying to burn us all alive.
Yeah, yeah.
It's such a false, obviously false narrative, but it got picked up and spread by Jason Rand, Brandy Cruz, and it quickly became a talking point. And that's one thing they are good at is they are good at making these really Fox News type sound bites and getting it kind of churned out and whipping up their supporters. And
Yeah.
that's a little terrifying. That's a little terrifying as well. Um, but ultimately, it really does seem like they are losing, and they know they're losing, and they're going to do whatever it takes to not lose, even if that means people die in the process.
Yeah.
Because with what we're seeing, I mean, it's only a matter of luck that no one has died so far at these protests as a direct result because of the police actions. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
In
we know for a
Seattle,
fact.
yeah.
Yeah, we know for a fact that like medics in Seattle, street medics in Seattle, basically revived a woman over by the East Precinct early on in the protest. The police literally killed, and they had to revive her 3 times. It's the humanity of the protesters is the only thing that's kept people alive. Certainly not any humanity on the police department side.
It's also like to believe the narratives that they're spinning of like, oh, they're trying to burn us alive, they're trying to kill us. You'd have to be a fucking idiot because these protests have been going on in this country for months now, out in the streets. There's been an enormous amount of contact between protesters and cops, and no cops have actually been killed during any of these things, which would be incredibly easy to do ultimately if someone out there really wanted to. Even that Molotov cocktail that was thrown at the East Precinct, I saw the video of it. It's like one guy throws, what is basically like, a pyrotechnics show at a concrete building, and the whole rest of the group there is sort of annoyed and has to leave because they know it's going to come down. So, we don't know, but you have to assume a lot of this is agents provocateur bullshit. But yeah, you would have to be kind of dumb to believe that these protests are violent, that they were out to kill these cops. But I can tell you, because I have a family, that people are that stupid. I mean, people are very fucking stupid. So
Yeah, I tweeted about this very skeptically because I've been very critical of SPD for years, even long before this, which is, I guess, why some people decide to call me anti-police. But one of the things I pointed out on Twitter, which made some conservatives very furious, was there's just pieces in the story that logically don't make sense. That if you were to like walk this scenario through your head, it just doesn't make sense. For instance, for that event, this SPD claims that they used Quicket, which is like instant, like quick drying
Quick
cement.
yeah. Oh, that's
Quickcrete.
so fucking funny.
Yeah, to seal them in so that they couldn't escape. And if you don't know what if you've never used that like Quicket before, it's basically a powder substance, and you have to add it to water, and it takes about a good 20 to 40 minutes to dry. So if you were really wanted to do this, I don't condone that kind of thing, but if someone really really wanted to do that, you would need more than 25 seconds.
Well, they could. The point is, they could do it. There are ways to kill cops if someone wanted to, and no one's trying to do this. So it's like, yeah, and the Quickcrete story, they love stuff about concrete. It's like a right wing obsession. Whether it's in milkshakes or in door jams or in ice cream canisters, they're obsessed with this cartoon idea of like concrete like being thrown on them and magically like turning them to stone, like when you look into the eyes of Medusa. And yeah, it's like it's a weird fantasy that has to be some kind of like weird psychosexual thing for the right wing male or something. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here.
It's just like, just make a story that's so fantastical to get people angry and upset. And I mean, when I pointed this out on Twitter, let's just say it enraged quite a few conservatives and the law enforcement today, which I mentioned that officers really like to read, that puts out garbage all the time.
Officers and Brian.
Yeah, I read all those magazines.
Oh wow,
Like an
I
idiot.
read once in a while out of curiosity. That's too much for me. But they dedicated 8 separate articles with my tweets saying that I was a terrorist for pointing out the obvious and the logical. And it's just ridiculous. But that's kind of the thing. Anyone who speaks out against this and speaks out with logic and tries to say, that's really not what's going on, and does so publicly, is going to be met with a lot of vitriol from their supporters. It kind of feeds their whole. I mean, that's basically why they do it.
Yeah, and what I think that another thing that's happening too is that for the longest time, right, police have just been able to get away with saying whatever. I mean, the most outlandish lies they've gotten away with because the media has always been their sort of compliant helpers and sort of shaping police narratives, right? And I mean, the police even have their own term for it that they jokingly, from the Bolin Commission, it came up that they jokingly call it testa lying. But the thing is I think the disbursement of information in social media has kind of hurt their ability to do some of that. When they tried to claim that incendiary bombs were thrown at them at the East Precinct, I mean, pictures immediately were going around showing the picture they'd shown, pointing out where it says candle on it. They're
Yeah.
clearly prayer candles.
I
And
actually saw a
just
protest sign that said this was a candle. It was funny.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, and people all over the country are just clowning on them. And like
But
the thing about
all people all over the country saw that because that got ran on national fucking news as
But
well.
what I think though is in the past though, because the news would have run it, and somebody at the news network probably would have been smart enough to kind of hide the image or make it blurry, people would have just bought this narrative. But there's actually been some because the news just doesn't carry the weight that it does that used to, that it's been able to, the narrative hasn't been able to be so overwhelming. The thing with the Molotov cocktails, it was astonishing how fast people found video and photos showing that showing the undercover cop walking the Molotov cocktails into the protest, leaving it, talking to other police officers, and then walking away. And it's like, I mean, just within hours, the whole thing unraveled. And 10 years ago, that wasn't possible.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the upsides of social media is there's cameras everywhere. Someone's got their phone out and it will be recorded. So, on the downside, that's how bullshit rumors get spread. But on the good,
Yeah.
on the upside, is that we're able to catch a lot of these wrongdoings that are happening by officers. And why we have footage of George Floyd, that's been happening for a long time. It's just now that we have social media, we have technology to make it go viral instantly.
Yeah. Well, and I'm hoping that on the balance, like society wide, that wins out. That enough people are actually just seeing the sort of torrent, the waterfall of images of police brutality and murder that that it soaks into enough people. But on the other hand, like at the same time that this stuff is available, that it's so much easier to uncover these things, that these images can get out there, this whole thing is unfolding basically. I mean, Alycia, the way you talked about it, this being basically for the cops in a way about the election, makes me think like that it's somehow, this is disturbingly like all a proxy conflict in the greater stupid American culture war, that like that it is just about like owning the libs and vice versa. And we know from all other conflicts in that culture war that the facts don't really matter, that it's really just like what ammunition you can throw up on the board to get your side juiced, to get the thrill of owning the libs or whatever. Which is wild to think about, but I mean, a ton of people saw that Corona box of like pristine Molotov cocktails with like perfectly like ironed all matching handkerchiefs, and we're like, oh my god, SPD narrowly avoided being murdered today by burning alive from Molotov cocktails. Like, some people think that.
Yeah, and they know. I mean, they know that the people who are that their base is never going to question anything they do,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how stupid it is. And what's kind of interesting about the language that Mike Solon is using, he uses a lot of the communists and Marxists, and those aren't new terms; they're very old. They've been around since like the 1920s and 30s, during the Red Scare, which ironically Seattle police back then had a big part of. And it's really just been this really long running culture war, right? Progressive, ideologies are bad. Equality is bad. These things are bad and communist, and they must be gotten rid of. So, I mean, it's really just. I mean, Mike Solon is tapped into kind of the, you know, classic American, culture war that we've been fighting here for a really long time.
Yeah, and it's worth sort of kind of drilling in on this sort of the anti-communist angle or whatever of the language, the Cold War language and whatnot. Because I mean, going back to the discussion over the consent decree, I mean, this was the language that Spog used. I mean, in 2011, when they're when they're being told that they can't racially profile anymore, they had an editorial in the paper where they called it the city, a socialist policy of the city to end racial profiling. There was another in their newspaper, in Spog's newspaper in 2015, where they compared anti-Confederate flag sentiment to the transition of Tsarist Russia to the Soviet Union and Stalinism as a way of life. So, by saying, hey, maybe the Confederate flag's racist, we apparently all accepted Stalinism into our heart. Again, if only. But but this has been like SPD's thing for a long time, and I think it's propaganda in the sense that they're trying to play on sort of the vestigial Cold War fears of the dying boomer brain, but at the same time too, I think it's something they deeply believe, that like anything short of essentially Nazism is communism in their
Yeah.
minds, right? And that is part of what makes them so resistant to any change whatsoever.
Well, you know who else? You know who else thought about that about the relationship between communism and Nazism, Brian? It was the Nazis. I wonder though if he's gone too far. At least, like, I mean, the hope is they've overplayed their hand, right? But you already read this, Brian, but also again this quote from Alicia's column, Mike Solon saying Seattle and Portland are the epicenter. He does not say of far left socialism and neo-Marxist ideology. He says are the epicenter of far left progressive socialism and neo-Marxist ideology. And so you got to wonder about the enormous number of people in these cities who think of themselves as progressive going, so you're saying the police, are just 100% politically aware that you are totally against progressivism
Yeah,
in general. That's an interesting thing for him to
the
do.
majority of Seattle and I think even Washington State, at least in this side of the mountains, would identify as progressive. So really, that's going against the majority,
Yeah.
not being for the majority. Uh, but a lot of law enforcement is just naturally very conservative, and conservatism is still very rooted in that Cold War, Red Scare mentality. That anything, you know, short of capitalism or not, anything that does not include heavily centered capitalism, anything that's anything less of Nazism is communism. And so it's not surprising that Seattle police or police in general would think this.
Yeah, and they're announcing it now. They're, like you said, for them this is about the election, and that mask is off. They're saying we are Trump's army in the streets. We are we have a unified political consciousness that identifies itself as explicitly arch conservative, um, you know, MAGA cops, man. Like they're saying that to everyone in the country, which is an interesting turn. I mean, you can go back. We've talked a lot about the fact that they could have played this very differently and like taken a gentler hand, but that just wasn't in their nature. And they also, on the political side, they could be pretending to maintain this neutral position of the just law enforcement technician who is politically neutral and just about the rule of law. But instead, they're saying we are a political force that is MAGA partisan in favor of law and order.
And it kind of is part of SPD's nature, and actually part of the nature of American policing in general is based in a lot of racism. Um, Actually, policing in America was based on slave patrols and slave catchers, and so that kind of mentality, even though we're 200 and somewhat years out of that era, is still prevalent. It's why we see all these issues, and Seattle police specifically has a really ugly history with racism, the overuse of force, corruption, all those things which never really got resolved. I mean, we've been locked in this 50-year battle to resolve these issues, and it's just gotten so bad to the point where now everyone can see how, you know, how deep these issues really go.
Yeah, and I think it's telling that at the onset of the consent decree, when it was brought up that SPD disproportionately stopped and searched black people, right? Disproportionately arrested for minor crimes, black people, et cetera, et cetera. When this was brought up, their response was that, yeah, for us to do that, or for us to stop doing that, would be socialism or whatever, right? Which was this deep ingrained thing. I mean, during the civil rights movement, the police said, any pushback against segregation as that's Soviet, right? And I think it's that combination in the right of the United States that's always been there since the founding of the country, where white nationalism is foundational to American capitalism and to the structures that keep it alive, right? And that might have something to do with the fact that our labor system was a racially based labor system for 100 years. But it's disturbing, and you see all the vestiges of it in there, which makes, I think, some of us very skeptical that the police could ever be reformed.
Yeah, it's a long running issue that's gone on for so long, and I'm a local organizer, so I've seen just in real life the difference between how the Seattle police will treat, say, Proud Boys or armed 3%ers
Mm-hmm.
versus a group of unarmed protesters, protesting against ICE at their headquarters downtown. Um, there, and that's not an intentional. That's because the police, often identify with that kind of ideology, those kinds of ideas, or are sympathetic towards it. In fact, there was an incident last year um, where Proud Boys had wandering around downtown during a Sounders game, looking for Antifa to beat up, and happened to attack some guy walking to a Sounders game who happened to be wearing an iron front shirt in front of the police. And the police basically did nothing, and that is a recurring theme that happens over and over and over and over again. When we had the incident on Capitol Hill in June where Nico Fernandez ran through a crowd of protesters and shot someone.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Yeah.
I was there for that. I got to witness that. And the thing that haunts me isn't so much what Nico Fernandez did, but how the police treated him with so much care. He
Mm-hmm.
walked right up to the police. They gently, take him away, and here the police are an hour later beating up protesters and tear gassing them, nonviolent, unarmed protesters. And
Yeah.
those are, those are real problematic issues that, have gone back a long time. And now people outside the organizing world, the general public, is now able to see this.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
that really goes back to what you asked. How can you reform that?
Yeah. But I think too, it speaks to some of the soft propaganda of the police too, in that in the George Zimmerman trial, a big cornerstone of his defense was, hey, if I'm a bad guy who did something wrong, why did they're showing you these videos of the police, talking to me afterwards. Why did the police treat me so nicely if I'm such a bad guy and I did this bad thing? And at least according to one anonymous juror, that was convincing to them or whatever, right?
Wow.
And so
Holy
there
shit.
is this thing where when the police go out and there is a peaceful Black Lives Matter march and the police show up with tear gas and beat the shit out of them, it creates a spectacle that in some people's brains they say, wow, those protesters must have really done something or been a real threat for the police to do that. But when white nationalist groups that kill 100 people a year, whatever, who literally are like the largest terrorist organizations in America, when the police treat them with kid gloves, it teaches people, no, those groups must be okay. Like they must not be that bad, right? Because why would the police, turn their backs to them and face Black Lives Matter? That must be where the threat's from. So it speaks to this sort of soft propaganda that the police do just through their actions, right? Not even consciously, but just through their actions and their sympathies.
Well, at some level, I think, what we know from decades and certainly from the last few months is that, all riots are actually started by police. I think we do know they must know and must have always known on some level that that is like a tactic that by creating a violent situation, the r-
Mhm.
the media and a lot of society is primed to view that as to fill the gaps in their head and say, oh, well, if the cops had to do that, it must have been because it was necessary, And I mean, again, because I have a family, I know you can be that stupid and ignorant.
There's a saying that goes in news: if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
they know that if there's violence, if people are getting arrested in mass, if there's chaos, it's going to leave the news. It's going to blow up. That's what people are going to see. And the problem then is magnified when we don't have news that can critically pick apart that can say,
Mhm.
okay, here's what actually happened and actually do the investigative research. A lot of times there will be, police will come in and start tearing things up, and it becomes a riot. Phone crews will get it. It'll be all over local news, and then there won't be any investigative follow up. It'll just be reading off of what the police happened to say, what their statement was for
Mhm.
the day. There's not really a lot of investigative journalism being done, um, which is unfortunate. Um, it really is. It makes it harder to get the narrative of what actually is happening out there and not just what the police are saying is happening. For instance, Q13, Cairo News, and Como have been pretty terrible on this lately of just running with whatever the police say and not doing any kind of follow up or any kind of investigation, to
Mhm.
see, what is actually the truth behind it, what really happened that day. There's people that are saying otherwise. Let's talk to them. Let's find out, what the real story is. A lot of that is being done by, activists or organizers or community folks, community leaders, or people like me who typically on our normal day job are not journalists, but we're doing this work and we're relaying this information out because it's not being done.
Well, that's the kind of work that yeah, so many activists out there are doing, like yourself, online in various places that gives us stuff to talk about on this show. Um, and we certainly appreciate that. Alicia, is there anything else you want to sum up with about sort of your feelings about what's the state of the movement here in Seattle?
um, I'm really hopeful that, I mean, it's terrifying to watch all this happen. I mean, I've been there when the police and National Guard are charging at you, and it's
Mhm.
one of the most terrifying things I've ever experienced. But at the same time, as strange as it sounds, it's also hopeful because next to you are also, moms, elderly people in your community. People are also coming out and fighting this fight, on the front lines who we typically haven't seen at protests before. And while I'm really terrified of, you know, the SPD's actions and people getting hurt, I'm actually hopeful that so many people are joining the movement for the first time and are seeing the problems that exist that we've just never fixed. That I'm hopeful that this is the start to actual real change going forward, which to me makes those risks worth taking.
Yeah,
Very good.
uh,
Definitely.
that yeah, I also am hopeful. I think we've tried to remain hopeful about all of this here on Seattle Sucks. Alycia Ramirez, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
And
Thank you guys
we'll
for
link to
having
this
me. You guys
piece
have been
in the
great.
Emerald. Yeah, it's really great being able to put on the same, the same podcast, two people who must be among Seattle's two biggest cop nerds based on just the article and what you said
tonight. I mean, how many other people in this town have actually read Law Enforcement Today or whatever outside of Alycia and Brian? I don't know.
I read
Like,
it by accident. To be honest, I read it by accident.
well, I mean, you were dropping a lot of facts and knowledge about the history of policing and SPD that I've only ever heard out of the mouth of Brian Platt. So I'm glad we could have you on here. This is basically, especially since Brian joined the podcast now, whatever, 2 years ago, I don't know, basically been a cop podcast half the time. And I'm glad we can keep that going with another activist who knows a lot about cops. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank
Yeah,
you guys.
thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'd definitely love to have you back to talk about police or anything else you'd want to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. In a better world. Maybe someday we'll stop talking about police on this show.
Yeah, I'll be doing more articles for the Emerald. I plan on there's a contract though coming up December, which will that's really going to be the method by which we change all of this crap behavior. So I plan on doing several articles between now and then to kind of get the public discourse going and really get people thinking about this in big picture terms.
Awesome. Okay, that's great. That's right. Yes. So in the South Seattle Emerald, which again is putting out a lot of great stuff, Alycia Ramirez will have an ongoing column, and we've just heard it here. It's going to be about cops. So,
there you go.
Yes, yeah, that will be a big deal. The contract negotiation for sure. So, cool. Thank you again so much, everybody. We'll link to all that, and thanks for listening.
Thanks again to Alycia for talking to us. That was awesome. Yeah, guys, great week.
Good times. We'll make sure to link in the show notes to Alicia's article. Make sure that you go check it out and you read it.
Yeah, Colin, I wish you could have been here with me at Brian and Bryn's house, where as we record this, because they've been stoked about their air conditioning all summer.
That's a flex.
Kept the house nice and cool. No, they absolutely. Now that the weather has turned, they're really excited. Now they can get the internal temperature of their home down to 50 degrees where they really want it.
That's a true Texan household.
Yeah. So they're pretty stoked, and we're fucking loving it over here.
Yeah, to be fair, Greg's not wrong. We do want it to be 50 degrees, but I think we actually have it on fan right now. So once it all of a sudden got cold outside because we blotted out the sun with man's hubris, I initially turned the AC off, but the AC is actually kind of doing a job of like filtering the air from the outside a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually making it a little nicer in here, just running the fan, just like running the air through it. I don't know if there's any science behind that, or if I'm just
presumably it has a filter.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't know if this is, but it's making it a little nicer in here. I'll say that. Although I still wake up with the scratchy throat and the cough and all that shit that everybody else has. But maybe it's COVID though too, because there's also a pandemic still.
Cool.
Oh, is there? I'd forgotten.
Yeah, well, pick your disaster, right?
In some good news for us, we have some new patrons that we should thank. BP, thank you. Sydney Rose, thank you. Megan Rabone, thank you. Teresa Gilbert, thank you. Chase Bratton, thank you.
Yeah, BP, thanks, giving us some of that oil money. Thank you.
They were court ordered to do it, Brian. Yeah. It's not that big of a deal.
At least one small local podcast.
Yeah, so thank you. If you want to be cool like them, go sign up on Patreon and hear our hundreds of private secret episodes that are in the vault.
This week, your Patreon dollars paid for the pizza and beer Brian and I are consuming, a parking ticket I got while going down to a sweep. Was there something else?
We donated money for N95 masks for the homeless as well.
Okay, great.
We actually spend most of it on donations to bail
That's
funds
not a promise.
primarily.
That's not a promise.
But yeah,
I don't
Yeah.
know if most over the history of everything, but
yeah.
Because I need to use the rest for my like futurist joke rock band called "We Were Promised Oxygen." So
Hell yeah.
cool.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening, and I guess we'll see them next time, huh?
Yeah, well, catch us on the Patreon app. All right,
All right.
bye-bye.
Bye.
bye.